everyone, welcome back to the Stitches and Scribbles channel. My name is Erin, and today I have a knitting tutorial for you. This is actually something that I made as Christmas presents for my D&D group, but you can use this handy little bag for dice, for jewelry, or any other small objects. Here's what it looks like up close. We've got a plain stockinette stitch bag with a little drawstring. This bag does kind of come in handy because it actually practices some of the techniques that you would use to make toe-up socks, namely starting the bag with Judy's Magic Cast On. So, without further ado, let's dive right into the tutorial. In order to make this dice bag, you're going to need a couple of materials. The first is a pair of circular needles. I'm using a size 1 today, but you can use whatever size best fits your yarn. You're also going to need a pair of scissors for cutting ends and a darning needle to weave them in at the end. You're also going to need a small crochet hook, but we'll get to that at the very end of this tutorial. For my yarn today, I am using some scrap yarn that I had in my stash. This is the Hobby Lobby hand-dyed yarn. I'm forgetting what the brand name is, but you can use, again, the yarn of your choice. I am personally using a sock weight yarn for this. So in order to get started, we're actually going to use a technique that is commonly used for toe-up socks called Judy's Magic Cast On. You're going to start by making a slip knot, making sure to leave a really long tail, probably 2 to 3 times the length that you want the bottom of your dice bag to be. Then you're going to pick up your circular needles and hold them with both needles in one hand. Then go ahead and slide that slip knot onto the bottom needle. Now what you're going to do is pick up your working yarn with your index finger and your yarn tail with your thumb. You're going to kind of keep your hand oriented like this for the entire cast on. We now need to cast on stitches to both needles. We already have one on the bottom, so we're going to start with the top. To do this, you flip the yarn over the needles, making sure to use the one that's on your thumb for the top, and then slide it between both. We're going to do the reverse for the bottom needle, so you lift your needles up, hook it around the yarn on your index finger, and slide it down. You're going to keep alternating directions like this until you have your desired stitch count. When I did this previously for dice bags that I made in December, I did 16 stitches on each needle, but because I'm using a slightly smaller needle for this, I think I'm going to do 18 stitches. So again, that's 18 on each needle. So right now I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 7, 8, 8, 9, 9, 10, 10, slide everything down a little bit, 11, 11, 12, 12, 13, 13, 14, 14, 15, 15, 16, 16, 17, 17, 18, 18. So that's my finished cast on. You can kind of decide how many stitches you want by how wide you want the bottom of the bag to be. This looks pretty good to me, so I'm going to use this stitch count. Now that I've completed my cast on, it's time to start knitting the first row. This is the top of your stitches from how you were doing it during the cast on. We actually need to flip it over so that you're seeing that ridge at the bottom, and that's how you know it's oriented the right way. We're also going to be using magic loop in order to knit this. So you need to pull out your back needle so that you have a little bit of slack on it and scoot your stitches up towards the top of the needle. Before you start this first stitch, you need to make sure that your tail yarn is twisted over your working yarn so that you can keep that final stitch locked in place. Then we're going to start knitting the first row as normal. So there's stitch 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. Now we need to flip and do the second half of our first row. So slide your needle back through those stitches. This can be a little bit tricky depending on what kind of circular needles you're using. I'm using cheap ones today, which probably wasn't the best idea, but it works just fine. Slide out your working needle so that you're ready to do the second row. Now your first stitch is going to be your slip knot from where you started, so you can go ahead and knit that stitch normally. Your other stitches, however, are oriented backwards from how they normally would be. So we're actually going to need to knit through the back loop for the rest of this row. So there's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, and 18, your final stitch. This one may end up being a little bit loose, but you can tighten it just by pulling that tail again. Now you've completed your first row. From this point until we reach our desired final width, you are going to be alternating between an increase row and a knit all row. So our next row is going to be an increase row. This method will also feel familiar if you've knit toe-up socks before, because it's an increase method commonly used in toe-up socks. So to increase, we're going to be increasing on the second stitch of every needle and the second to last stitch on every needle. So for row 2, you're going to knit 1, then knit 1 front back, so front and back, and then knit across until the second to last stitch of the row. These rows are pretty short, so this project tends to go pretty quickly. Okay, now I have 2 stitches left, so I'm going to do another knit front back, and a knit 1. I'm going to repeat these same steps on my other needle so that my increases look the same on the front and the back of the bag. the transition between this needle and its cable is not ideal. That's why it keeps getting stuck. Unfortunately, all of my good needles of this size are currently in pairs of socks. There we go. So again, same thing on this needle. Knit one, then knit front back, then knit until there are 2 stitches left, couple more. Okay, 2 stitches left, so we'll do another knit front back and a knit one. So now you're going to alternate between rows where you knit all of the stitches and rows where you knit one, knit front back, knit until there are 2 stitches left, knit front back, knit one. And that's on both needles to do the increases. Depending on what sizes you want, you can adjust the number of increase rows that you have total. I am probably going to do this alternating increase pattern until I reach row 6 is what I was doing previously. So only 3 increase rows total, separated by knit all rows. I'm going to go ahead and do that off camera and then talk about what to do next. Once you reach those 3 total increase rows, or 6 rows alternating increase and knit all, you should have something that looks like this. So we have a very gentle curve from the bottom up to our current row, just to give it a little bit more of a rounded edge at the bottom. Now, if you get to this point and realize you want your bag to be wider than what it is, go ahead and do some more increase rows, making sure to still alternate with those knit all rows. But otherwise, if you're happy with the width, you can start just knitting in the round plain until you reach your desired height. I'm probably going to go for about 25 rows total until I get it to the height I want. But again, this is totally adjustable. You can go to whatever length you desire. That's just what I'm doing for mine. So go ahead and continue knitting in the round, or adding increases if you need, and then knitting in the round. And I'll meet you back here to do the drawstring channel. I ended up doing about 27 rows instead of the 25 I originally had planned, but you kind of just want to get to a point where it looks roughly like a square, however many rows that takes. Now we're going to start the row that creates the channel for the drawstring to go through. So you're going to set up your needles just like normal, and instead of doing a knit round, we're going to alternate between yarn overs and knit 2 together. So I'm going to start with a yarn over, and that's creating 1 new stitch, and then I'm knitting 2 together, which is a decrease. So I'm going to end up with the same number of stitches total, but it's going to be alternating between those yarn overs and those knit 2 togethers. And what this does is it creates a row of eyelets, or little holes, in your work that you can then feed a drawstring through in order to seal the bag closed. So you're just going to do this across both of your needles. Sometimes doing the knit 2 togethers can feel a little bit tight if your tension's really tight, but just make sure that you're picking up the entirety of both stitches and you're not splitting either of your strands of yarn. And this is a really easy way to add a drawstring into a lot of projects, whether it's a bag or if you're making a cowl that you want to have a drawstring at one end so that you can pull it tight. This is a really easy method to do that without actually knitting a channel for a drawstring like you would see on a pair of sweatpants where it's like a little tunnel that the drawstring goes through. This instead will just alternate through the stitches instead of being enclosed. It is a little tricky to start a row with a yarn over, but as long as you keep your tension pretty close, it shouldn't be a problem, and it'll even out when you do the next row. So in order to keep my first yarn over nice and tight, I line up my needles like I'm going to do a regular stitch and yarn over there. That way it's really, really close. Sorry, it went off camera. It's really close to your previous stitches. This is one of those really tight knit two togethers, but we got through it. And in case you're wondering how long it took me to knit the body of the bag, it maybe took an hour. I did do it in parts because of other stuff that was going on, but you could easily do this as a last minute gift for somebody. If you need to make a whole set, like for a D&D group, you could dedicate a couple of weekends depending on the number of people that you have in your group. I made these for Christmas for my D&D group, which is actually composed of all family members. So I made a set of 5, and I think in total I maybe spent 6 hours on all 5 of those little bags. And that included the first one where I was like trying to figure out the pattern. So these are definitely a very doable last minute gift. These are also a great way to practice some of the skills for toe-up socks. Your next step is just going to be to knit 2 rows plain. So getting your needle back in through those yarn overs can be a little tricky too. But your last step before we bind off is just to do 2 rows of knit all. Once you have your 2 knit all rows done, it should look something like this. So you can see that clear row of eyelets. And then you're just going to go ahead and cast off. You can do a stretchy bind off if you want to, but it's not really necessary for a project like this that's so small and not a garment. So I'm just doing a traditional cast off. And if you don't know how to do that, although if you know all the other skills in this video, I feel like that's something you would know. You knit 2 stitches in a row and then lift the first one over the second one. And you just keep doing that all the way around. If this was something that like needed to stretch over a larger object, like if I was doing something like an e-reader case or a phone case, I would recommend a stretchy bind off, but since this is just meant for dice or for jewelry, depending on what you're making it for, you definitely don't need the extra stretch in the bind off, and keeping it non-stretchy will help it hold its shape a little bit better as well. I also really love how these little dice bags look in variegated yarn. This is a great thing to do with scrap yarn if you have any. I'm personally using some scrap yarn from a shawl that I made a while ago at this point. It's also a great thing for mini skeins, but you could definitely get a couple, at least 2 if not 3 dice bags out of a mini skein, especially depending on the yardage of the mini skein and the weight of the yarn. And again, if you're doing this with scraps, you can do it with whatever weight yarn you want. You just adjust the number of stitches you cast on to what your yarn is. So if you're using a thicker yarn than I am, you can do way fewer cast on stitches, like maybe even 10 or lower if you're doing it in a bulkier yarn. Or you can keep it the same and just get a bigger bag out of that yarn. I would recommend that if you're using this for jewelry, make sure that your needle size that you choose for your yarn is going to give you a pretty tight gauge, because you wouldn't want anything slipping out holes in between stitches, especially if you're going to use it to like hold earrings or something like that. But on that note as well, This is a great way to gift a set of dice or gift jewelry by making your own little personalized bag for it. I was struggling with that stitch there. I'm also working these with Magic Loop on like the smallest circumference needles you can get, and Magic Loop still works for this, which is kind of nice. Actually, I don't think this is the smallest circumference you can get. You can definitely get some where it like is really tight, but this is pretty small. This is also a great way to use up extra yarn from like a pair of socks that you've knit. Because at least for me, and I have pretty small feet, when I knit a pair of socks, I usually end up with a little bit left over, especially if I did contrasting heel, toe, and cuff. So this is a great way to use up that little bit of yarn. I also really had fun when I was making my set for my family of matching the mini skeins I got to the dice colors that my D&D party uses, and that's also a great way to personalize. So like if you are using a yarn in the color scheme that I have and you have someone who uses orange or yellow or even gray dice, this would match really, really well. But you can also definitely pick colors inspired by the character that your party member plays, or if you're using it for a different board game, even matching it just to the player colors within the board game. I know I've seen people make their own cases for games like Catan that have a lot of little tiny pieces, or even a game like Wingspan that has all the little eggs that go in it. If you're really looking to use up scrap yarn, you could always make a set of little piece bags for regular board games instead of D&D. I think these would also be great for storing jewelry while traveling, because you can separate sets of jewelry easily if you make a bunch of them. Got just a couple stitches left, almost lost that one. And last one. So once you're done, you can go ahead and trim your yarn, pull it through that final loop, and weave in your ends. You should have one from where you started and one at the end, since we didn't do any color work or anything like that. I'm going to go ahead and do that off camera and then meet you back here with a crochet hook. Once you've woven in your ends, you should have something that looks like this. Don't worry if the top curls a little bit. That does get corrected slightly by making the drawstring. So to make the drawstring, I'm starting with a slip knot, and I'm also using a, what size is this? 2.5 millimeter crochet hook, so a pretty small one. If you don't like working with a crochet hook, you could totally do this step with an I-cord, but I prefer the look of the chain stitch drawstring for something this small. So if you've never done a chain stitch before, you put your slip knot on the hook, you wrap the yarn around the crochet hook and pull it through. And you just keep doing that until you get the length you desire. I usually shoot for somewhere around 65 stitches, but the actual number doesn't really matter. And since I'm not making this for like a matching set or anything, I'm just going to go until it's a little more than 4 times the length of one side of the bag, because that means that it'll feed through the channels on both sides and have some extra to tie it, pull it tight, do whatever you need to do with it. A lot of knitters, if you don't have an actual crochet hook, you might have a fix-it tool in your stash, which is just a crochet hook, and you can totally use that to do this because the size of the crochet hook doesn't matter a ton. Obviously you don't want to use a giant one, but most fix-it tools are fairly small hooks anyway. You can definitely just use whatever you've got, or again, knit an I-cord if that's what you prefer, or even do a braided strand to serve as your drawstring. Just take 3 lengths of your yarn and braid them together so that you get a little bit of a thicker cord. Just going to hold it up to measure. I probably need a little bit more. I definitely use the crochet drawstring a lot for knits. I actually also used this for a long time to create ponytail hats, where I would do the yarn over knit 2 together eyelet row and then use a crocheted strand like this as a drawstring, and then you have a hat where the top of it can be opened and closed depending on if you're wearing a high ponytail or not, which is very, very useful in the winter. I might have to make myself another one of those someday. That's the great thing about small projects like this. You can practice a lot of techniques that you can then apply to bigger things. Just going to check our length here, and that's probably good. This one's even a little longer than I probably needed. When you're done, you just trim it and pull it through the last end. Now to thread it through the channel, I'm going to take my yarn needle again. I'm going to thread it with one of the ends of my crochet chain, and then just use that yarn needle to weave back and forth between those eyelets. Just like that. Once you get to the last one, you can trim the excess yarn after pulling both ends of the crochet chain tight to make sure that those knots aren't going anywhere, and then you can trim them off. I like to knot the ends together, but you don't have to do that. Just like that. And then you can adjust your drawstring, and there you have your little bag. That's going to be it for today's tutorial. I hope you enjoyed making your little dice bag or jewelry bag, and just thanks for watching. If you want to see more crafty content from me, make sure you hit that subscribe button so that you can be notified of all of my crafty videos right here on YouTube. And if you'd like to follow me on other social media sites, make sure that you check the description below for that information. Thanks again so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye everyone!